Right, rook and rook's pawn versus bishop. There aren't many circumstances where a bishop stands a chance against a rook and a pawn, but the two main ones are if it's a bishop's pawn, which I covered in the last video. Even then the bishop's pawn needs to be on the 6th rank already, and we get something called the Del Rio position, where this is the important defending diagonal for the defending side. If it's a rook's pawn, it has to be on the 6th rank or the 5th rank, and this is actually the Cosio position that we've got here, and or Cosio, and that's the important diagonal. If the pawn's on the 6th rank, it's incredibly easy to draw this. We just keep our bishop on this diagonal and take the h-pawn when it arrives on h7. All of this, by the way, has to be into the right corner. Okay, if you're not in the right corner, if the square of your corner square is a different colour to the square of your bishop, then it's just a loss. Okay, it has to be in the right corner. Then it would have to be a bishop's pawn on the 6th rank, covered in the last video, or this video is going to be if it's a rook's pawn on the 6th rank or the 5th rank. If it's on the 6th rank, it's incredibly easy. Get rid of all these silly colours. Like I said, we're just going to keep our bishop on this diagonal. It's stupidly easy. If it's on the 5th rank, it's a little bit more difficult, but it's still a draw. And then if it's, you need good understanding of that really to then be able to do the one on the 4th rank where it's not a draw, sadly for the side with the bishop. But it's actually quite tricky to win. The procedure for getting into the winning position, the winning procedure is actually quite tricky to put together if you're playing someone who knows what they're doing and they're stopping you from preventing you from doing what you're doing. If that makes any sense. Anyway, let's start off with the 6th rank one. This is the Cosio position. This diagonal's the important one to stay on. Just stay on that diagonal and there's absolutely nothing that white could do. We might see the rook hit the bishop, just stay on that diagonal. Let's just look at what happens if we don't stay on that diagonal. Couple of things, don't go over here. Okay, so stay on this diagonal, but stay on it down here if you can. There are some circumstances where the e4 square is out of bounds, but once you understand why, you'll see that this isn't one of them, so the e4 square was fine as well. The h7 square is not fine. Okay, and a little winning procedure that is worth being aware of in these situations is rook c8 check, bishop blocks, so black's going for the stalemate. There are some circumstances here where we've got a pawn on h5 and we need to push it, or we've got our king on g6 and we need to bring it back. Here we've already got the position we want. We want basically just to give the move to black, which we can with a pass. Black's only got one legal move here, which is king h7, but the reason we wanted that is we go check, that basically forces the king back to h8, and then we come in with the king. Okay, so that's a nice little winning procedure there. So yeah, don't get your bishop all the way to h7, just keep it back on these squares ideally, and as long as you understand why e4 might be dangerous, it's fine here, then yeah, don't put it on e4 if it is one of the dangerous cases. What happens if we leave that diagonal? Well, we had to stay in control of the h7 square, because as soon as we're not in control of the h7 square, white can push the pawn. Black might play bishop d5, desperately trying to get back onto this diagonal. White king comes into h6, it's all over. Okay. White's going to be able to manoeuvre the rook around. There's quite a few positions where the rook and the bishops do a sort of just sort of a bit of a fighting for squares thing, and the rook just wins like all the time. It's that the rook can eventually sort of bully the bishop off some of the important squares in so many of these positions. And this is one of them. We're just trying to, the bishop might come to e6, guarding the c8 square. There's a fantastic line where I don't want to give it away just yet, but if the white rook was on a7, black to play is actually a draw. It's an incredible trap that we ought to be aware of, actually. Because as a general rule, what you want to try and do is get your rook to be this side of the bishop to avoid falling into the trap. I'll do that more later on. But bishop e6, let's fork the bishop and checkmate. And black might play bishop f7, that bishop can't be taken. But we just move the rook to where it's coming to a dark square. Next go, and it's over. But I mean, if you're the side with the bishop, this is so easy to draw. You just ignore all of that and just keep your bishop on this diagonal. And there's just nothing that white can do. And as soon as the pawn advances, you take it. Okay, so very easy to draw that. Now, what if it's a 5th rank pawn, a 5th rank rook's pawn? This is much harder, but it's still a draw, and this is still the important diagonal. Okay, just keep controlling that diagonal, and you're going to be fine, as long as you know what to do when white eventually comes in opposite your king. So, I don't know, rook a7 to begin with, and just play a move like bishop d3. Just stay on this diagonal. I am going to play this game against this position against Stockfish. Annoyingly, Stockfish doesn't do all the tricks. It doesn't try everything. So it's actually quite simple to draw this against Stockfish. But I'll go for all the tricks here that could be possibly made by white. It's just worth understanding what. First of all, if the bishop goes here, I mean, our pawn's back on h5, but it's the same idea. Okay, king into h6. This check's going to be happening reasonably soon. If the bishop goes to g8 straight away, we can just play a waiting move. The bishop has to move somewhere. I don't know, here, check. Back to g8, and then we can let the black king out. King out, h6, and then we'd have to repeat all of that again in a minute, but we're going to make progress that way. And there's nothing that black can do about it. So bishop h7, bad idea. What if black sort of voluntarily steps off the diagonal they have to be on? Again, it's just over. It's a big mistake to come off that diagonal. Black might get confused because they want to use that diagonal because they think that's going to be the thing preventing the stalemate. But now we can come in opposite with the kings. King h6. A checkmate's being threatened. So what might black do? Well, they might just stay on this diagonal, thinking it's the important diagonal. But then we go check. Bishop has to block, and then here's that king g5, king h7, h6. Exactly the same position we saw a minute ago. Let's just keep going through it in its entirety. Bishop d5, rook a7 check, king to h8. Now, this is the bit where you could fall into the trap. Because remember, as soon as the bishop's not controlling h7, this is where we might think to push the h7 pawn. Push the pawn to h7. This is now astonishingly a draw. Okay, what black does is comes back and hits the pawn. White defends it. You think it's over. It's just a win. There's in Dvoretsky, there's a case where a grandmaster actually resigned in this position in the tragicomedy section. This is why you wanted the rook, as a general rule, this side of the bishop, if you can. Pause the video if you like, black to play. How about that for an absolute thunderbolt? Okay, there's no way for white to play a waiting move along the 7th rank. Rook takes bishop is stalemate. Rook a8, we just take the rook. So there's nothing that white can do. White has to move. Well, if they move their king, then we can just come back and attack the pawn. If they move their rook, we can also come back and attack the pawn, even though the rook's controlling the e4 square, because it's still just going to be a stalemate. So we'd just see a repeat. Rook would have to go back to a7, bishop b7. So watch out for that little trap if you do end up in this position. But in anticipation of that, white can get their rook out of there. Rook e7, bishop back to g8, and now the king comes in, g6. Bishop c4, then the h-pawn gets pushed. The king sliding across to h6, and it's all over. So a quick reminder of how we got there. That was like just a waiting move with the rook, and we're just seeing what happens if black comes off this very important diagonal. The white king will come into h6. What if black thinks to run away here with king g8, which is the way that you should play this if you're still controlling this diagonal? King g8 would be the drawing procedure. Rook g7 check. King h8 is a fairly obvious. Rook c7. Okay, the bishop stays in this diagonal, check, and then we let the king out and we go for all that business again. If king to f8, which is the drawing move when our bishop's controlling this diagonal, the problem is the bishop's not controlling the g6 square. So we're just going to come across to f6, and This pawn is going to run very easily. So, but yeah, just don't come off that diagonal. So bishop d3, stay on that diagonal. King into h6, and this time we can run away with the king. King g8. Rook g7 check. Jesus de la Villa writes how it's very easy to find the right move here, because if you go to h8, then you get mated effectively. So king h8, rook d7, and it's all over. If white tries at this point, instead of rook g7 check, rook a8 check, we just step to f7. There's no way for the white king to get out without sort of letting you back in. You're just controlling all the important squares on that diagonal. So king g5. We can even play bishop c2 there as well, but we could also play king g7. That would have been absolutely fine. But yeah, bishop c2 would also do it. h6, and we're back to the Cosio position. So rook g7 check, king f8. Rook drops back, hits the bishop as well. Keep on that diagonal. Now this is the bit. This is what I was saying. We have to be careful. This is one of the tricks you could try as the attacking side. If I was playing the side with the rook here, I would just keep hitting the bishop until it thinks that it can go to this square. Like, we've got these three squares, so you know that's enough. There's no way the rook can control all three of those squares at once. But you might hit it like 2 or 3 times and hoping eventually it comes here. Okay. Because the main problem white's got is that, you know, the rook's blocking the black king's crossing of the g-file, sure, but we can't get our king out. Okay, as soon as the king gets out, the black king's back, so we can't have our king stepping in front of the rook, and there's nowhere to put the rook. You know, if you think of where it just came from, there's nowhere to put the rook. At the moment, if we move the king to g5, we've lost the rook, and the bishop's controlling that important g6 square. So you think, okay, we'll come back and then get the king across. Well, if bishop e4, we can get the king across, because the bishop's just fallen to a discovered check. So it's only that you need to watch out for in all these situations, that the e4 square might be poisoned. So as a general rule, try and keep your bishop back on one of these 3 squares as the defending side. So bishop c2. And yeah, this is one of the tricks. So there's no way for white to make progress except to try tricks. Rook g6. If that rook's taken, it's a win for white. I'll let you calculate the pawn ending, but it is. We just ignore it. We just stay on this diagonal and ignore it. King f7 was fine as well there, by the way, but we could just ignore it. The only time we can't ignore it is when white threatens to come into h8 with their king. So as soon as white plays king h7, then you can't ignore it. The rook's pinned to the king, then you have to play king f7. If the king goes to h8, you just take the rook, and if the king comes back to h6, you go back to f8. There's just no way for white to make progress. I mean, they could try and leave their rook on the g6 square. I think that's how they get their king out. But now you take the rook. And in fact, you didn't even need to take the rook there. Incredibly, you could have played king f7. It's still drawing, but you know, why wouldn't you just take the rook? So yeah, rook g1, keep your bishop on that diagonal, king g5, king g8. It's just a draw. Let's go for a couple of games, and then I think I will try and draw that against Stockfish. I don't think it's going to be very interesting, to be honest, and I might just encourage you to forward wind the video, because I don't think Stockfish tries all those tricks. I mean, I practiced it a couple of times. It's very, very easy. It didn't try the trick with the rook. It didn't really try anything, although it did actually try one other thing that isn't in the textbooks, which I had to think about, but it wasn't that difficult to think about. We'll see if it tries it again. Anyway, this is a game from 2009. It is black to play. We know all about the Cosio position. What would you do here as black? So this is the important diagonal. if white's bishop gets onto that diagonal, you've had it. In the game, rook f6 was played, the white bishop went onto that diagonal, and it was just a draw. So we've got to stop the bishop getting to that diagonal. There's 3 winning moves. 2 of them are sort of the moves you would expect. Rook g2 works and rook f8 work. But what we're going to see now is the sort of, it's a bit of like a dance between the rook and the bishop, and the rook eventually bullies the bishop into a place where it just has to sort of give up. Because what's happening is that black keeps preventing white from getting to this diagonal. But the point is that white then moves and then is probably threatening to get to that diagonal again. So what we're looking to do is play king b3. Okay, but we have to keep bullying the bishop until the bishop not only moves, but then can't get to that diagonal, and then we play king b3, and then it's all over. So yeah, they work. There is actually a third move that works, which doesn't look very good at first, which is rook f1 check, king to a2, but we can still cover the g8 square. So rook g1 works. In fact, rook back to we could repeat. They're the same trick. The whole point is that when this pawn's taken, that forks checkmate, and the bishop. So it's all, the third solution is all based around that. But let's just go to cover the g8 square. It's all very instructive, this. So remember, the white bishop's trying to get onto this diagonal. Okay, so where can it go? How can it get in that diagonal? Well, there's that try and there's that try. Bishop f5. Okay, it's trying to get onto this diagonal. So we stop it. Rook e2. Back to h7. Fine. Rook to e8. Stopping it. Bishop g6. We've got to stop it getting to f7. Rook to e7. And then this is the bit. How does the white bishop get onto that diagonal? Okay, there is no square. That's covered by the rook. That's covered by the rook, not straight away, but bishop f5, and then the rook's already covering that square. That's covered by the rook, and that's immediately covered by the rook. So if I just the two that the arrows are pointing to, the rook's covering already, and the jumping point for the bishop, the rook's covering those directly. So whatever white plays next, bishop f5, then we play king b3, and white's dead. Going back to this position, bishop e4, okay, so then we play rook g5, just stopping it getting to that diagonal. If king a2, by the way, at any point, because the rook's just going to keep bullying the bishop if the white king comes forward. Then we've got king to b4. White can try king b1 here. That's a bit sneaky, because then if king b3, then bishop c2 check. But we've got check, king a2, and then cover the d5 square from there. It just goes on. I'll leave you to sort of explore. But basically, the rook does eventually bully the bishop away from being able to get to that diagonal, but not just that, not even able to get to it after a move, and that gives us the time to play king b3, or in this case we're going to need to check at some point and then go and bully the bishop so the b3 square is free. So yeah, in this 2009 game, the player with the black pieces just blundered with rook f6, white played bishop g8 in it, and it was a draw. Next, black to play. This is a game from 2012. What would you do here? I guess it's a very easy move to find, given what this video is about. And it's not the only drawing move. Though this isn't a fortress. This position isn't a fortress. In the long term, if black tries to treat this position as a fortress, it does get broken down. I'm fully intending to do a video at some point on bishop versus rook, fortresses and apparent fortresses. It all looks pretty hard. All I know is that this one isn't a fortress. So at some point reasonably soon, black needs to act. And there's the acting. h6, exclamation mark. That pawn was taken. I mean, there's no way to avoid the pawn swap, and we have the Cosio position. I mean, white laboured on for a little bit. Oh, it was a brilliant h6 exclamation mark. I just remembered what happened in the game. White came in, I say white laboured on, hoping something would go on, and straight away black blundered. Any of these squares is fine. I'll just stay on that diagonal. Even the e4 square's fine. We haven't got the situation with a rook on the g file, and it allows the king to cross the g file and this discovered check. So that's the only time the e4 square's a problem. But black incredibly played bishop h7, and we saw the whole procedure that I've already talked about. h7, king back, bishop back to e4, king h6, being careful not to fall into that trap. Remember, if the white rook was an a7, then bishop b7 is a draw. So bishop f5, rook f7, and black resigned. What a shame that was, after finding that brilliant move, to then go and mess it up with bishop h7. Okay, I'm going to move on to rook and 4th rank rook's pawn versus bishop. I'm going to move on to that next. That's not a draw, but you have to understand how the 5th rank one was a draw before you really get the winning procedure on this one. This one has driven me mental. I've been out on runs and had this going round and round in my head, and could not for the life of me work out how do you win it. It's I'll get onto it in a bit, but first of all I'm going to try drawing this position, the 5th rank pawn. I'm going to try drawing this against Stockfish. Like I said, I don't think it's going to be that interesting. So yeah, you could just forward wind the video a bit. But let's see, maybe the Stockfish will do something interesting. There you go, I'm going to be black. Right then, so the king's into h6 straight away, and now we have to come out, king g8. If we see rook g7 check, then we had to go that way. The other thing that isn't covered in the textbooks is that you might see Stockfish doing it. They engineer it so the king is on f6, and they play rook g7 check. And I worked out there that in that circumstance you'd have to go to h8. Okay, it was a fairly simple workout, because the whole point is that if your king gets cut off from the g file, that's a big problem. Except it's not a big problem if white's king's stuck in front of their pawn. Anyway, let's just play any old move here, because that's just done nothing. And yeah, I just don't... There you go, there's the check. So the king has to come to f8. And I don't think it has to go back to g8, you know. I don't think it does. But there's no reason not to put it back to g8. Yeah, the reason it doesn't have to go back to g8 is, imagine that rook could come back and hit our bishop. We couldn't play king g8 there, we'd have to move the bishop. Like, imagine if our bishop was on b1, we'd have to play bishop d3. Bishop d3 is a perfectly fine move. So I know, I'm just from the fact I know it's a draw, I know I haven't done anything wrong, I can conclude that, for example, bishop d3 is fine as a move, although I wanted to play king g8. Should I put it on g8 now? Yeah, I don't think we'll see, sadly, the rook g6 trick where you just don't take the rook. And unfortunately, we might not see anything imaginative from Stockfish at all. If you were a human playing it, oh, that's different now. This is the one that when I was going through the position, I said if the king comes out, we'd have to go back. But actually then I glanced at the engine moves and it was perfectly fine to not even bother going back. I'm going to go back there. I always think it's quite amusing when you know, playing against computers, is that they'll, I mean, obviously they'll just wipe the floor with everyone in the entire world, but they play moves that there's just no sense to them. It's, when you see some of these moves, it's like you feel like you're playing a beginner who's just, try this, I'll try this again. And there's sort of no learning process going on. No trying. I mean, that, for example, what was that? There we go. So yeah, you're hopefully starting to see why I said this. I mean, I was reluctant to maybe even do this as part of the video, because there's just nothing going on. I don't think it's particularly instructive. Sorry about this. Just forward wind it. I'm on move 27. Forward wind it a little bit, and I don't think Stockfish is going to do anything interesting. Shall I go back? Let's go back. Yeah, I mean, this is just really bizarre now, isn't it? What's it trying now? King there. Now we might see the should I put my king on g8 and see if we see this rook g7 check? I was hoping it was going to go rook g7 check, so that I could say, then you do have to go to h8. That was something that the Stockfish tried against me before, that the Jesus de la Villa book doesn't talk about. There you go, and the pawn's pushed to the 6th rank, and I really am just going to stop this now because it's even easier. Now we just leave our bishop on this diagonal and wait for the pawn to get to h7, which it will do after lots more messing around by Stockfish, and it's just a draw. Right, so yeah, sorry that was a bit of a non-event, that practicing against Stockfish. I don't think Stockfish tried all the tricks, but you know, make sure you've got a thorough understanding of the 6th rank one, which is easy, the 5th rank one, which isn't, but as long as you know all the tricks, then you should be okay. And I just want to read what, if that's come up on the camera, what Jesus de la Villa says about the 6th rank one. It's almost like he didn't have enough to go back on the 4th rank one, sorry. When the pawn is on the 4th rank or less advanced, the ending is 1. This is the bit that I found sort of amusing. The winning sequence is too long to learn by heart, but if you've carefully studied the previous two, so the 6th rank and the 5th rank one, you'll be able to find it over the board. I present here the analysis without comments. So, alright, thanks. So I've gone through his analysis without comments, and I've been on at least one run. You know, I tend to run for about an hour, and it's just going round and round in my head. I was thinking, how on earth does it work when... Because I'll show you, this is the important diagonal again. And we're going to try and win by... Well, I'll show you the first few moves. We come in opposite with the king. And remember, if it's a 5th rank's pawn, the king has to get out of there, so that when this check's delivered, black plays king f8. And if the white pawn was on the 5th rank, this is just a draw. Okay. But what white's got to try and do is, having the h5 square as an extra, is they've got to try and at some point have their rook back on g5 and get their king out of there. They can't get their king out from in front of the rook, because as soon as the king steps in front of the rook, the black king goes back. So it has to be from behind the rook, and they can't do it here, for example. The black bishop's controlling g6, so they can't do it here, they just lose their rook. So they can't move their rook off the g file, because then the king will just go back anyway. It has to stay on the g file. So that's the plan. At some point we've got to try and get the rook to g5 and then get the king out from behind the rook. But the problem I had on my runs, the thing that's going through around my head again and again, I just couldn't visualise it, and my sort of blindfold chess skills did reach their limits, I'm afraid, on this one, is that the bishop's on this diagonal, but there's just so many squares on this diagonal where if black wants to, let's say that our rook had come to g5 and our king's there, we can just do a check, the king has to go back again, and then we come back. So that was the thing that I sort of took me a long time. I'm still not 100% sure that I've got my head around it. But the important point is that the black bishop staying on this diagonal was so important on the 5th rank rook's pawn 1 that black was just drawing it by the skin of their teeth. That's what's going on. So sure, we can get a check here, but we don't have to go back necessarily to the h6 square. We could actually go to the g6 square, and even though the black king can then step in front, we can then do stuff with our rook. Okay, I'll go through it now. Anyway, so rook down to g3. So remember, black's trying to stay on this diagonal with their bishop, but good squares to get to use are this one and this one, in view of the idea that we can just deliver a quick check here and then come back to this diagonal if we see what white's plan is. I mean, if I had the black pieces in this setup and understood the 5th rank one really well, as I do, I can just draw that one, then the 4th rank one, I would be making my opponent's life as hard as possible on this, and just because it's actually quite tricky to work out how do you get that rook out of there. Now, one square that's not quite as good is the b1 square, because then, I mean, there isn't a c0 square to step to, so the bishop does have to do 2 moves now to deliver that quick check. So then you can go rook g5, fine, but then the bishop steps back. You know, you haven't got to h5 yet, but this is one of the points. King h5, and black's like, okay, there's the check. You have to go back again. You're not going to get out from, you know, you've got to try and sneak out behind your rook. I'm not letting you. You have to go back. But now we can go to g6. And if black's like, well, that's fine, the whole point was you're not allowed to step in front of your rook. It's like, yeah, but that's not the only thing going on here. You were meant to be on that diagonal, remember? So I'm going to put my rook somewhere where you can't get back on that diagonal and threaten a checkmate. Bosh. So that's one of the keys to understanding how you win this, is that diagonal is so important for the defending side's bishop to be on, that sneaking your king out from behind your own rook, you know, this path isn't the only important thing. If black stops you doing that at all costs, well, it is at all costs, and one of those costs is they're not going to get back to this diagonal when you change back to the other plan. What does black do there? I mean, it's checkmating 3 except for this move. I mean, the engine's saying rook d5 there, which to me sort of looks like it's starting to go around in circles. But for me, a natural human move would be come back, hit the bishop, and when it moves, I can go to g7. I've clearly made progress there. It's going to be an easy win. But anyway, why would black put their bishop on b1? They're on this important diagonal. Let's just keep, especially in view of the fact I snuck out to g6 there, let's control the g6 square. So king f7, let's have that as the main line. Then you play king h5. Okay. Now there's loads and loads of different moves here. What if black just says, okay, my bishop's in a great place, I'm going to move my king. Well, if my bishop's in a good place, I'm going to move my king. There's only 2 squares to go, where if we don't go on the f-file, we'll cut it off and it's an easy win. Okay, so it has to be f8 or f6. If f8, okay, then we go rook g5. We're threatening to sneak out. Bishop d1, king g5, king g8, rook c5. Again, controlling the one square on that diagonal that the bishop can't get back to, and that's a win. King f6 is going to be the main line in a sec, so black can't move their king. Let's try some bishop moves. If this check happens straight away, it's going to be pretty similar. King to g5, black might be like, fine, I'll sneak out. You know, once you've cut off your control of the g file, I'm going to hop across. But we've got the same thing again, exactly the same idea. Okay, controlling that diagonal, and yeah, and the black bishop's not going to be able to get back to it. So that's if bishop d1 check. So it's actually very hard for the side with the black pieces to quickly pop off that diagonal and get back, because once they're off that diagonal and you come this way, they have to spend their next move. As soon as the white king steps to the g file, they've got to spend their next move trying to get across. Whilst otherwise you're just going to out the way of the rook and the king's cut off, it's an easy win. But because they have to spend their move doing that, they can't spend their move getting back onto this diagonal, and you just move your rook. I mean, in that last case, it was... which one was it? That was bishop d1 check, so that was control of the c2 square. Fine. What else? If they stay on this diagonal, this is the poisoned e4 square again, remember? Remember why that square's poisoned? King g5, and if the black king steps this way, discovered... discovered check. I was about to discover check. Doesn't pick up the bishop because of this, but we've got this. Okay. And if bishop b1, then the black bishop can't get back in time to check the king. So we're out, and it's an easy win. I mean, really, what black would like to do in this position is pass, and I guess that's what the main line is trying to do. The bishop's on a great square. I'm on this diagonal. That square's poisoned because of the discovered check thing. That square's controlled. Never mind, poisoned, it's controlled. So I just want to leave it there, to be honest. I want to leave it on that diagonal. It can come and do this check and then come back. Except as white, we're trying to contrive a circumstance where black can't spend their move coming back because they've got something more pressing they need to worry about. So let's play black's last remaining move then, which is king to f6. And this seems the best idea because we've left our bishop in a good spot on c2, but also we're still now controlling the g6 square, which is one of the tricks that white could use. We still play rook g5. Couple of ways that black might think to stop you coming out on g4. One of them's bishop f5. It's the same solution against both of them, but one of them's bishop f5. We can play king h6. The bishop has to move. Okay. The king can't move because otherwise we'll play king g7. So the bishop has to move somewhere. It's got to remember control this diagonal still. So bishop back to d3, but then we can start hassling it. And the king's opposite here, so we can start thinking about doing a check on this f file, pushing the black king to the e file, and then it's just curtains after that. Once the black king's been cut off onto the e file, it's completely over. So black covers the f3 square, hit the bishop, and again it's just the rook bullying the bishop. The only way to stop that check was to remain on this diagonal, but now we've come off this diagonal. So rook down to e2, this check's happening anyway. And if black desperately tries to get back to g8, king h7, there's nowhere that the black king can go now where this check isn't going to force them onto the e file. So that was bishop f5. What if they do the main thing that was driving me mad on all my runs? It's like they just do that, and then what do you do? Okay. Well, we still come to h6, and then yeah, if the bishop comes back. Now, because these kings are opposite, now we can hit it, and we're going to play rook f2 next move. Okay, so the bishop can't go back. So the black king has to move, so that we haven't got that. King g8's being, I guess, threatened if we step in front of our king, or if we come down and hit the bishop and deliver a check. That doesn't do anything because black's got king g8. We play rook g7 check. Really important intermezzo check. The idea is that if king f6, then we can come back and hit the bishop. There's a bit of bullying of the bishop necessary, but that check's happening. So that rook g7 check has forced the black king to go back to f8, but now you've got the extra space that you need to play with, and the white king can simply step across to the f6 square, and it's all over. Everyone got all of that? Hope I've explained it in a way that means you don't have to go on 1 hour runs and drive yourself mad over it. What's the probability that this comes up in any of our games? I've not had this in any of like the 300 odd chess games I've played since I got back into chess about 4 or 5 years ago. So there you go. So there has to be a transferable skill in there somewhere. I'm very convinced that the way that the rook has to bully the bishop off all of the squares is a fantastic sort of feel for the power of the pieces. you get these things in chess, don't you, where you study a particular endgame. Like corresponding squares is another one. Like that square corresponds with that one, and you sort of almost forget you're playing a game of chess. And we have that sort of rook versus bishop dance, where we're constantly the rook's controlling the bishop, getting to that diagonal, and then that square and that square. So the game's not chess anymore. The game is, can the bishop get to this diagonal, and the rook's stopping it. So we've got like a piece that moves horizontally and vertically. Can it beat up the one that moves diagonally? It's almost like a maths puzzle rather than a game of chess. So yeah, do try and remember that you're playing a game of chess if you ever get it. But I definitely think there's a transferable skill in there anyway. Right, this is a game from 1980. Petrosian is white in this one and executes everything I've just said absolutely perfectly. So King h5 was played, and the black bishop, which already occupied this very good diagonal, chucked in a check here on d1, trying to force the white king back. The white king crosses. Okay, the black king has to go for it now. If king f4 is allowed to happen, then the black king's cut off, so the black king has to go for it. This is a good pause the video moment if you want it. White to play. What did Petrosian do? This is the important diagonal. Yeah, sure. The black king's got across the g file again because we just stepped in front of our own rook. But we'll just stop the black bishop getting onto that diagonal. And just controlling the c2 square. Bishop e2. Dvoretsky writes something interesting here, which was count the number of moves from here it would take the black bishop to get back to this diagonal without going over a square that's sort of controlled by white. In fact, I think it was from here. So how many moves does the black bishop need? So for example, it can't go, it couldn't go to f3 and then e4. That's not allowed because the white rook's controlling f3. So just this is just to give an idea. I think he writes this sentence just to give an idea of just how powerful the rook is, how much it's bullying that bishop in what is a fight for squares. That's like a subset of the game of chess. You know, there's a game of chess going on, but the black bishop's trying to get onto that diagonal so it can draw it. It can draw this game of chess if the white pawn's too far forward. But white can just push the pawn now because the black bishop's not going to get to that diagonal. And I think it's 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. That's one of the possible routes to get to that diagonal. Interesting. I mean, I can't profess to know that why he put that little sentence in, but I think it was, you know, just see how much the rook dominates the bishop. Just count the number of moves. 1, 2, 3, 4. That the black bishop needs to get back to that diagonal. That's how well placed the white rook is on c3. Bishop e2, and Petrosian knew how well placed his rook was because he just pushes the h pawn. Bishop a6, h6 check. That would be a massive mistake. We're in the Cosio position if the black bishop can get to that diagonal, but it can't get anywhere near that diagonal. King g6, black stuffed. Bishop b7, waiting move. I think that was the only move, wasn't it? Rook comes to e3. Bishop to d5, we saw a check, bishop g8. Let the black king out, and then we can check it and come back in. And black resign there. Right, next, this is a game from 1958. It is white to play. This one's absolutely brilliant. It was a game, actually. It looks like a study, but it was a game. What does white do here? You think, well, you're in big trouble, aren't you? The pawn's already got to a2, supported by the rook. And then you realise, hang on, there's stalemate themes going on here. But just be a little bit careful. In the game, the player with the white pieces saw the stalemate theme and played bishop g2. Black played king a3. And then they're like, oh, Zugzwang, bishop has to move, went to f1. That's quite clever, I suppose. Rook h1 would still be stalemate. White played rook c2 and they resigned. But it is a draw. Bishop d5 check. The king has to support the a-pawn, or you just take it and you're in the right corner. King a3, bishop g2. Rook moves. I mean, if the king moves, we can just play bishop back to d5 and then pick up the a-pawn. If the rook moves, we can play bishop back to d5 and then pick up the a-pawn. Rook h2, bishop g2, and that was the draw that was missed in the actual game. It's really sad for the player with the white pieces because they realised that the draw was there, and then the stalemate tricks. They realised the stalemate tricks, and then didn't chuck in the extra check that they needed to do it properly. So they got zugzwanged. There was I haven't got it as one of the positions, but there was one other. I think it was a black and white sort of swap around, but there was a position like this where a grandmaster just resigned rather than playing bishop g2 in a position like this. Right, next, this is a game from 1922. It is black to play, and it's gone in the tragi-comedies section. It's a very, very easy win for black. I mean, it's a win regardless because we've got a 4th rank rook's pawn. But something like king h3 and white's piece is already not particularly well placed. So if bishop to d4, I guess desperately trying to get onto this diagonal. Rook g2 check. The king has to go to f1. Rook h1 would fail immediately, obviously, to that. But already we can cross. Okay, the bishop was too late onto that diagonal. So all the problems, that I was going through a minute ago, black didn't have them in that game, and they could have just done this. The player with the black pieces played h4, which is a horrendous move because it's now, as it happens, h4 is still okay, but you've just turned a 4th rank pawn into a 5th rank pawn, and you've got to be damn sure that you know what you're doing when that happens. I mean, I suppose Petrosian did that in that game, and he was damn sure what was going on. But if the white bishop can get onto that diagonal, then this is already a draw. So white played bishop d4, and then black did play. Black played king h3 and completely threw away the win. Okay, because then the white bishop got onto this diagonal, and rook g2 check, king f1, and it was a draw. Even after the horrible h4 as the opening move instead of king h3, and white plays bishop d4 trying to get on this diagonal, excuse me, it's still a win for black. There are 4 winning moves. Okay, I'm just looking at the 2 moves there that I expected to see, and there's 2 others, and it makes sense why they're there. But what do you think you should play here as black? Let me pause the video and have a go at it. The 2 moves I expected to see are rook e2, stopping the bishop getting to that diagonal, and rook a5, stopping the bishop getting to that diagonal. And again, the rook will bully the bishop so that eventually it can just bring the king into g3. You can also stop the bishop getting to that diagonal with king f5 and king f4, which doesn't look great. You want your king sort of near the action, especially king f5, but king f5 apparently is still not chucked away the win. But yeah, rook e2, for example, would do it, and the bishop might come back trying to get on the diagonal. Again, how do we stop it getting onto, this is the diagonal, we want to stop it getting onto. Rook e8, try to get on again, rook e7, tries to get it on again, rook d7, and slowly but surely the rook has bullied the bishop. In fact, I think that's it, isn't it? Isn't that basically the same as the one we had earlier on? So the 2 circled squares are controlled directly by the rook, and the other 2 are controlled by the rook sort of next go, as in we can still play king g3 without fear of a check. If the bishop came to e3, then it can't check on f4. So king g3, because of this, white's got to play a move now, and then the move after, get onto this diagonal. Well, that's impossible. That's just impossible. Can't be done. And if there's a king move, we can see rook d2 check, because we're already controlling the d6 square. So maybe not king g2, because that allows h3 check. But if king h2, then we could see rook d2 check, king somewhere, and then king into g3. That would do it. Computer was also saying h3 you could have done there, because we're controlling that square still. Right, last but definitely by no means least. Last but not least. Some kind of English sentence that actually makes sense there. Just insert your own one, because I can't talk English. This is a study from 1924. Take all your knowledge of everything that's happened in this video of 4th rank pawn, 5th rank pawn, 6th rank pawn, which diagonal the black bishop wants to get on, etc, etc. It is white to play. How does white win this? Pause the video and have a go at it. So this is a 6th rank rook's pawn, which is a very easy draw for the defending side, provided they can get their bishop onto that diagonal. There's a slight extra complication here, in that the white king is a long way away from where it needs to be. So sure, we can use our rook, and we're going to use our rook to sort of bully the bishop off being able to get onto that diagonal. But what if black just says, never mind that, I don't need to move my bishop around, I'm just going to come and collect the pawn, because you know your king's too far away. So how does white deal with that? So this is the diagonal. The e4 square is where the black bishop connects with it. The first move is rook g4. Okay. King h7 just come to collect the pawn. I mean, that's a question that needs answering, but we'll answer. It's the same answer as what's about to happen anyway. Bishop to b5, and now this coming onto this diagonal is being threatened onto the d3 square, and I mean, we could play rook g3 and go around in circles, but we're going to do the same sort of thing as before. We're going to bring our rook in and really start to bully the bishop. I mean, how can it get onto this diagonal? I mean, which squares are covered and which ones aren't directly? I mean, there's no point. We're already covering these two directly with the rook, and the bishop can't get there because the rook's already covering the a4 square. And in fact, I think the king's covering everything else for now. So this is the point where black would have to come in and try and attack the pawn. I mean, you could have asked that last go, why did black have to move the bishop at all? Just come and attack the pawn. And it's the same answer. White plays king f6. And that pawn can't be taken because of rook h4 checkmate. And again, there's just not really a square that the black bishop can go to get onto this diagonal. There's just nowhere. The d7 square's covered. The a4 square's covered. We don't care about b5 and my colour coding's all over the place, but we don't care about b5 and c6 because we've already... What am I doing? We've already covered the... I'll get there eventually. Okay, let's do some colours that make sense. Okay, they're already directly covered by the rook. We don't care about b5 and c6 because our rook's already covering the points on the diagonal. And finally, the e8 square. All right, that's protected by the king, but after king g5, we can just deliver this check, and we've won the bishop. Whew. So I've confused myself there with my own colour coding. So I don't know, what does black do? They can't take the pawn, so a bishop move, just like a waiting move, but then the king connects with the pawn, and it's a pretty simple win from here. If bishop to b5, and bishop's already covering the d5 square, we're just going to bully that bishop again. Rook d5, bishop c6, rook to e5, again covering the e4 square, and after the bishop comes back, rook e7 check, king h8, and then we can push the h pawn. King's coming into h6. Or if black preempts that and plays king h8, we're still bullying the bishop in a way that it can't get back to that diagonal. Rook c8 check, bishop blocks, and then this is the bit where we kind of want to pass. So we just pass, rook d8, king h7, and then we do a check. That's probably about the fourth time this video we've seen that position. Right, so that's everything on rook and rook's pawn versus bishop. Hope everybody found that useful.